Back in February of 2022, I made a video talking about the best 5 bosses for beginners, ways that you could make money, but also improve PvM as well, with a focus on how these bosses would actually help you improve. I had to check through thinking, surely I've updated this by now, but I actually haven't, so today we're going to do that. So in this video, for you beginners getting into PvM, these are going to be the best bosses for you to start off with, why and how you can actually make a bit of GP along the way. So with that being said, let's go. Now the last time we talked about this, I actually started off with God Wars Dungeon 1, but in this video we're not even going to consider that, because yes, this is a place that you should go at some point, and it is absolutely still a valuable place to learn DPS rotations and whatnot. But with Necromancy being introduced to the game, there's actually some better options for the whole getting into PvM through bossing along the way. Now, anybody who is getting into PvM probably wants to start with Necromancy. The reason being is the pathway from having no gear to actually getting some of the end game gear, which is super useful, is a hell of a lot easier. And Necromancy is built for the newer players to understand combat a lot better. It gives you a really nice wide variety of kit to use as well. And you'll also be upgrading your gear along the way from the beginning all the way to the end, so you know what the gear does, and it's also your own gear. Like, you're not going to be confused in any sense on what upgrades to get, because it's going to hold your hand across that process, which is probably a good thing. For comparison though, a full set of tier 90 Necromancer gear, not including any accessories like essences of finality and all that sort of stuff, just purely the armor and the weapons, is going to cost you about 50 million GP, maybe even less. Taking a look at that for any other combat style, you're looking in the hundreds of millions of GP to be able to even compare. However, it just so happens that along your progress to upgrading your Necromancy gear from the lower levels into the higher levels, you will verse a boss called Hermod. Now, Hermod is super easy, but he does have some mechanics, and it will teach you a couple of things in this fight. The reason you would kill Hermod is to get the Hermodic plates, which you can use to upgrade your Necromancy gear to the DPS path. Even if you plan to go the tank route, eventually you may want to grab this, so this boss is worth mentioning. Now, the boss is super easy and doesn't hit you all that hard, and only has a couple of mechanics you need to worry about. In one of them, he will slam his sword down, which will disable you using any protection prayers. You can either just get away from this by pressing escape or just moving out of the way, which is going to teach you a bit about positioning and awareness on timings of when to deal with mechanics like this. And then second of all, he will conjure some skeletons, which will require you to kill those before you can carry on dealing damage back to Hermod. This teaches you ways to either deal AoE damage so you can kill them nice and easy, or just to be aware of timings and prepare yourself for actually taking down other additional things in the way before you get back to your main target. Using things like Threads of Fate here, or your Scythe to do area of effect damage, or taking advantage of the area of effect damage that you get from your zombies conjure. But the fact that there's a few ways to actually deal with this just gives you the options and sort of allows you to think and plan ahead, which is going to be a great thing for future bosses. Once you've passed Hermod though, and you've achieved some decent level gear, you're going to be then wanting to move on to some other things. So where do you go from here? Well, let's talk about it. Moving on from Hermod, you have probably heard of the Archglacior. This is the next boss that we're going to talk about, because this boss offers a hell of a lot for a beginner to get into PvM. Not only does it offer a lot in terms of learning, but it's going to offer you a pretty good amount of GP as well along the way, especially for someone who's beginning and has like a ton of gear upgrades still to get. This is going to offer you chances to make a lot of progress while also progressing in your skills along the way too. Now, the reason this boss is so good for beginners in PvM is because it has in the normal mode an option for you to toggle on and off all of the mechanics. You can go in there with absolutely zero mechanics to begin with. When you come towards the entrance of this place, you'll be able to see the mechanics at the top, and you can turn them on and off just by clicking on them. If you enter with zero mechanics, you can use this as a great opportunity to literally just focus on getting a faster kill time each time you do this, so that you can figure out good ways to practice your damage rotations. You'll have no interruptions, like I mentioned before, from any mechanics coming in, any need to change your prayers, all this sort of stuff, and it's not going to hit you all that difficult either. It's also worth mentioning that the Archglacior in normal mode is a safe death area, meaning you won't have to pay any costs to death if you are actually killed here. You'll just appear outside and you'll be good to go. But you can use zero mechanics not only to increase your DPS and practice that, but to get used to using keybinds that you may have set up to practice and get an understanding of how certain abilities work and in which combination you may want to use them, and just see how things interact overall. And then from here on, you have 5 different mechanics that you can learn and practice one at a time. The first mechanic being one that's going to be familiar from Hermod, being Glaciite minions. You're going to have minions spawn on the field, and you won't be able to deal damage to the Archglacior until these are dead. You're going to want to kill these off nice and quickly. They're not very difficult to kill in normal mode at all, so clear them off and then you can get back to the Archglacior, which is why Hermod was kind of good earlier, because it's going to get you used to things that are like seen often around the whole of RuneScape and PVM. Moving on from that, you have the Flurry ability, which basically makes it so that the Archglacior can use all 3 combat style attacks. 3 meaning not necromancy, but attack, ranged, and magic. He will attack you with all of these, and you can just get used to using your prayer flicking here and changing between them. It's not going to be anything that is intense or anything like that. It just gives you a nice entrance to getting used to having them keybound so you can actually change your prayers at a comfortable place, but also just a pace where you recognize different attack animations and you can react to them without getting blown up, because even if you miss it, you're not going to just insta-die, but it's a good way to get yourself started and introduce you to this mechanic. Next, you have Pillars of Ice, which is going to give big sort of like beams of ice across the screen, as you can see here, and you just have to basically deal with positioning to avoid these. So you can use things like Surge, Bladed Dive, all this sort of stuff to actually get out of the way. But if you can't get out of the way, it also lets you use a different way of dealing with this sort of thing, such as using defensives, Reflect, Barricade, all of this sort of stuff are things that you can take advantage of in terms of your defensive abilities to be able to deal with this mechanic. Then you have the Exposed Core, which is going to give you a DPS check or DPS test, which you will see a lot throughout different bosses in this game. You're going to have to damage one of the Archglacior's arms to break free from the enclosure that he places you in, and if you don't do this in time, you'll take a increased amount of damage. But this just means, again, that you're going to get used to saving certain abilities or knowing which abilities to throw in which order to give a high burst amount of damage to clear this off as quick as possible. Then finally, you have the Frost Cannon, which is just going to make you react to something quick enough to make sure that you can use a certain defensive ability, one of them probably being Devotion or Resonance in normal mode, Reflect even, maybe using a potion like a Vitality potion as well. Many different ways of dealing with this, but the best one is probably just using Devotion. Like I said, you can toggle these on and off, and you can take them on one at a time, and then you can start mixing them together, which is why this boss is so good for beginners and why we're spending so long talking about it. You can have Flurry and the minions on, and he'll just use them in a random order, and you'll be able to actually decide and react to these as they go along. Then you can add the Exposed Core, and you'll have to work along this until you're used to it and comfortable to be able to react to everything and know how to deal with it nicely. You don't have to overwhelm yourself straight away. You can just pick one thing at a time, and then when you feel comfortable that yes, I can do that now, add the next one in. You're not going to get blown up damage wise because the boss doesn't destroy you, and you aren't going to lose anything if you do mess up and die. So the Archglacior is insanely good for practicing mechanics and getting you used to other things in the game. Another reason why this boss is great for you to get started with is you are actually still going to be able to make a good amount of money from doing this. In normal mode, the way that the drops works is if you have more mechanics, the more amount of GP you're going to get, right? But even with no mechanics, you will still get some sort of drops. And then as you become more confident with the mechanics, you can start making even more GP. Once you enable all of the mechanics, you can actually get yourself a very nice chance at a rare drop, being the Scripture of When, which will be around about 35 to 45 million GP as I'm making this video right now. That's a massive amount of gold for someone to get their hands on if you're around the level of using the Archglacior in normal mode to practice mechanics. Like, this is going to be huge for you. But this boss also just has some other great drops, such as Hydrix Bolt Tips, Onyx Dust, and like Onyx Gems themselves, like Uncut Onyxes. And then you've also got the Dark Nihilus and Laying Artifact as well, which is on the rare drop table. But this boss overall is going to offer you a great way to make a bit of GP while also practicing everything nice and slow. Now, these are the two main things that I wanted to talk about, the Archglacior being the main boss to focus on to learn mechanics, because of the fact that it's designed in a way to teach people and have people be able to toggle the mechanics on and off to actually learn without being distracted by too many things. You're not going to get overwhelmed. It's going to be great. But following on from here, your best bet is to probably head over to God Wars Dungeon 2, where you can take on Vindicta, take on Hellweir. These two bosses are going to be great for teaching you different mechanics, such as using Resonance to get heals from big hits, positioning to make sure you're not taking too much damage from the fire or from the like mushroom spore things, and many other things as well, killing the ads in Hellweir and prayer flicking in Vindicta. You'll notice that these mechanics are repeated later on as well. When you reach bosses like Raksha, you're going to be doing prayer flicking. It's a bit more difficult than like Vindicta or the Arglaisaur, but it will just give you that confidence to get into there and try the next step. After God Wars Dungeon 2, there is the Rex Matriarchs. You could take these bosses on. You'll have to use the corresponding combat styles, of course, but they have unique mechanics as well for each one of those. So it just gives you a little bit of extra chance at getting something new. But if you are hunting money, a great spot to look at is Kerapac in normal mode. Kerapac right now in normal mode is insanely good. I made a video on it recently. I will link it in the description so you can check it out. But this boss is a gold mine for normal mode right now. This isn't the easiest boss, but if you've taken on everything before mentioned so far, you will probably be absolutely fine. And if you are in Necromancy gear, tier 70, tier 80 gear is absolutely fine here. You're going to get like slightly slower kills when you start off, of course, but you will still be able to take this boss on with a bit of practice and make a good amount of money. Once you've taken on Kerapac in normal mode and you're comfortable with this boss, then really you're good to move on to a lot of other things in the game and just get ready to start doing things like elite dungeons, or start doing things like Nex maybe, or a Raxor could be your next step. At some point you are going to have to take a bit of a jump to go from a normal mode boss like Kerapac to doing a full elite dungeon, or doing a Raxor, which has much more like heavily focused mechanics and this sort of stuff. But it will definitely be worth it, and it will all add to your journey as a PVMer, and then eventually you'll be raking in that GP. So hopefully this video has helped you guys out on knowing how to get started. That is the path I would take if I was a new player. I would just go through Necromancy, go through Hermit and get my plates and practice the mechanics there, get used to the keybinds and that sort of stuff, and then I would move on to the Arglaisaur and spend quite a while messing with the mechanics and adjusting there. Just remember, even if bosses aren't insanely good money for a low level, you guys are still taking on the fact that you are dealing with different mechanics and improving with those sort of things, your reaction times, what to expect with like things coming up ahead, getting used to doing a good damage rotation, planning ahead on certain abilities to save when there's a mechanic that you know needs to have like high DPS, like the arms at the Arglaisaur, and many other things as well. And along the way, you're still going to be raking in a decent amount of gold for your current level. While combat is definitely important, don't forget to check out skilling and all that sort of stuff, questing as well, and clue scrolls if you are into that sort of stuff. RuneScape has tons of content, so don't just get lost fully in PVM. Anyway, I hope you all found this video useful. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll catch you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.